I'm really behind on my movie reviews. I've seen 9 movies that I have to review and just haven't done so yet. So let's start with the newest ones and try to make our way backwards. In The Conjuring 2, James Wan is back directing. It's no longer the spin-off director of Annabelle. Ed and Lorraine Warren are back, and this time they're investigating a new case. This is the Enfield poltergeist in England. Things are a bit familiar and things are a little bit different in this film. At the beginning of this film, Ed and Lorraine Warren are investigating the Amityville house, The Haunting. Something happens during the seance. Lorraine sees a vision, a terrible premonition of her husband's death. This really shakes her. This causes her to not want to investigate more on these paranormal activities. But now we have this case in England that's getting a lot of buzz, a lot of attention, a lot of hype. There does seem to be a family in desperate need. They're in trouble of this paranormal haunting. But before the church can get involved, they really need hard evidence. They need proof that it really is a haunting. So the Warrens are called in. They are convinced to check out this house, see if there's any proof, any real hard evidence of a haunting, and enough to convince the church to help. I think that's the best I can do without giving anything away. Now, going into The Conjuring 2, I knew I was going to like it, and it's not just because I love the first film. No, it's because I am a fan of James Wan's directing. A lot of the movies he's directed, in fact, all the movies that he's directed and that I have seen, I have liked. Yes, various degrees of like, but I have liked all of his films that I've seen. He's directed the first Saw movie, Dead Silence, Death Sentence, Insidious, The Conjuring, Insidious Chapter 2, even Furious 7, and now The Conjuring 2. And if you're thinking, well, what about Annabelle? What about all the other Saw movies? What about Insidious Chapter 3? Those were all different directors. Yes, I really loved The Conjuring, and even though I've never made a countdown or made a list of my favorite James Wan films, I have no idea where the first Conjuring would actually place, but I have to say The Conjuring 2 was a much more enjoyable film for me than The Conjuring, even though I do love The Conjuring. I think James Wan does have a talent for making horror films, and the fact that he's directing alone makes it a really good horror film, in my opinion. There's a lot of great scare setups, a lot of suspense, a lot of atmosphere, things that are really creepy in the film. And it's all thanks to pacing, to lighting, to just downright spookiness of what the ghosts look like. He has a talent for making horror films. And one of the things I really loved about the film is I think something that goes along with James Wan's directing is because of the build-up of these scares. It feels like it's catered to a lot of horror fans. I mean horror fans that have seen all these things done over and over and over again. People that know the cliches, that know the industry, that know exactly what goes into horror films. Because the setup to some of these scares, whether it be jump scares or actual scares and creepy things that happen, the setups to these cliches that you know are going to happen are really well done. There are several times where you know exactly what's going to happen because you know the cliche, you know, oh, this is what's going to happen, but it builds up in a way that almost feels like, okay, we're expecting people to know exactly what's going to happen, so let's elongate it, let's make it more suspenseful, let's make it longer, and maybe do it in a way that you're not expecting. I'll give 2 examples. One is something that's less spoilerish and it's something more cliched, so I'm going to tell that first, and then the second example, in case you have seen the film and you want more detail, I'm going to do something that's a little bit more spoiler heavy, well, it's not spoiler heavy, it's just a more unique type of scare. It has the cliche of where a kid rolls a toy truck somewhere and then eventually the ghost is going to roll it back. You've seen this done in films all the time with horror films. It could be a truck, it could be a toy robot, it could be a ball. Usually some sort of toy does get rolled back to the kid. Now the way this scene is handled is a little bit more suspenseful, and it plays off our knowledge of knowing what's going to happen. So at the start, he sees a toy fire truck that one of the kids, the youngest, I think he was the youngest boy, there were 2 boys and 2 girls in the family. And he either steps or kicks on a toy fire truck, and it turns on, and he had been up in the middle of the night because he ate a little too many biscuits. He got thirsty, so he went to get a glass of water and came back, and he stumbles in the dark and comes upon the fire truck. So what he does is he gets it out of the way by putting it in this little tent that they have set up in the hallway. And so then he just goes back down the hallway to his room, and it's right across from the tent. It's a long ways down, but right across the tent. But just as he's getting in bed, the toy fire truck rolls back into his room from that long distance. So he gets out of bed, he's sort of a little scared by it, investigates the truck, and then either puts it back or he rolls it back. I can't remember which. It was a while ago that I saw it. But then that whole time you know, okay, the ghost is going to roll it back because that's what happens in horror movies. That's the cliche. So throughout this scene, he's constantly looking down the hallway towards the tent. He can't go to bed. He's restless because he's almost thinking it's going to roll back on him. And so I think he actually looks down the hallway about 5 different times before going to bed, and then suddenly, of course, the fire truck rolls back. I think they helped build that suspense by elongating the scene, even though we know exactly what's going to happen, and it's really built well. Another one, this is a more unique scare, and it's a little different, so I'm going to put spoiler because it's not as cliched as the fire truck scene. Now there's this evil nun that you see in the trailer, this evil looking demonic nun, and at one point Ed has a vision in his sleep, dreams about this evil nun, and paints a picture of her. And so there's a picture of her in the Warrens' house, this painting. Well, during one point, Lorraine is with her daughter home alone, and the daughter sees the nun, and Lorraine tells her, okay, go hide, I'm going to investigate. She goes into the office. This is where the nun's painting is. It's all dark, pitch black, and of course the painting is right next to the light, and you can see the painting. You think, okay, it looks very much like the nun, but maybe it's a painting. Sure enough, it is the painting when she clicks on the light. But as she's investigating the room, the light turns off again. And so you see the picture and you're thinking, oh no, now it actually is going to be the nun this time. That's what you're expecting, and that's what the cliche would be. She turns on the light, still the picture, but so she walks away, and then that's when she sees the shadow of the nun walk across the wall. She follows that shadow till it reaches right where the painting is. The silhouette fits the actual painting of the nun. And in that point, that's when the nun materializes and you see hands and fingers come around from the back of the painting, which is hanging on the wall, by the way. And that's when the painting comes to life and the nun sort of embodies it. So it's these scares that build up in a way where you know what's going to happen, you expect what's going to happen, but sometimes it happens in a slightly different way than you'd expect. And the build to those things are suspenseful and elongated and make it more creepy as it goes along. And this is just build up to scares and actual structure of the scares I'm talking about. There's more to it than that. There's lighting, there's the set design, there's the acting. I think he has just a really great way of directing horror. One that's both skillful, very atmospheric, and almost traditional in that sense, while still feeling like a more modern take with jump scares and other types of scares like that. So yes, does it have horror cliches in it? Yeah, it does, but so did the first Conjuring. It's the craft and the skill that really enhances those into something more than just your typical cliche. But I think what also enhances The Conjuring 2 and enhanced The Conjuring is the characters and the story it's telling. For one, The Conjuring 2 just isn't your very typical ghost. Just like The Conjuring, there's a unique take on the spirit, on the spiritual evil entity. And I won't give this away because there is a twist to it. The first Conjuring had a unique take on the spiritual entity because it wasn't just a ghost in that one. In The Conjuring, it was a ghost witch. So similar to The Conjuring 2 does have a unique spirit in it. Even though the trailers are not going to reveal it, it's more of a twist. But again, it's the characters and the story that really enhances this movie, and it's the story about the Warrens and their troubles, and you get more backstory of them, you get more chemistry, more connection, you get to learn more about the Warrens and care a lot more about them. Plus, Lorraine is dealing with this premonition of her husband's death, and she's worried, she cares about him, she doesn't want him to be killed, and she worries that taking on another investigation might lead to her premonition. You also get a little bit more about the Warrens' faith, and their faith helping them battle demons and horror and, their spirits. Not only that, you have a family that you can care about, this English family that is in not only a bad economic state because she's a single mother, she's dealing with 4 kids. They're living in a pretty bad house. Oh, and let's not forget to mention, the house is haunted and they're dealing with this evil spirit that's just tormenting them and terrorizing them, kicking them when they're down. I think The Conjuring 2 is a good example of how you can sympathize with characters in horror films because there's a lot of struggle going on. There's a lot of doubts and disbeliefs and a lot of things that they're going through, and it's really easy to sympathize for them. Now, if you're not a big horror fan, I can see you not liking this movie all that much, especially if you don't like cliches in horror films and don't see the craft of James Wan while he's making this film. And I can see how this movie could be a little slower for some. The Warrens don't actually get to the Enfield house until halfway through the film, practically. So for the first half of the film, it's 2 separate stories happening on at the same time. Story of the Warrens and the story of this family struggling with this ghost. But at the same time, it is a little bit more fast-paced than The Conjuring, even though the Warrens don't show up until halfway through the film, or at least they don't show up at the house until halfway through the film. But the hauntings themselves, the supernatural stuff, it happens a lot faster in The Conjuring 2, and the family and other people and the media start believing it a lot faster than they did in the first Conjuring. Which makes sense since this is a story about whether there really is a haunting or not. Of course, as the audience, since we're seeing it through this movie perspective, we completely feel for the family and know that they're not joking around, and that it's not some big publicity stunt. But for the characters outside the house, that's what it could be a question of, if it's a publicity stunt, if it really is a haunting, or it's all a hoax. But I was never bored with this film. I was always entertained. I really enjoyed the film, and I actually like it a lot more than The Conjuring. And because I would give the first Conjuring 5 stars, if it's better than The Conjuring, that means, yeah, The Conjuring 2 for me is 5 stars. But then again, I'm a big horror fan. I am more lenient on horror and fantasy, so if you're not a big horror fan, you might not like The Conjuring 2 all that much. But if you like The Conjuring, if you really liked it, I encourage you to try The Conjuring 2 because you might like it a little bit more. Or you'll at least like The Conjuring 2, most likely. So did you see The Conjuring 2? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. If not, what is your favorite James Wan film? One that he's directed. I listed off all the ones he directed earlier. What's your favorite out of that list? And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews of 2015 and 2016. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.